My name is Janelle Chenard, and I write children's stories. I'd go ahead and ask you, the adults, to please put aside your adult cynicism for a little bit, close your eyes, and remember what it was like when you were 3, 4, 5 years old. And the happiest times in your life were when somebody read you a story. Ozzie the Awkward Elephant, from the story collection Reading Rhymes. Ozzie the Awkward Elephant never went out just to play, because Ozzie the Awkward Elephant wanted to dance the ballet. His friends joked about it and snickered a little in scorn. A ballet dancing elephant had never been born. Poor Ozzie, he tried. He knew they spoke truly, so he tried that much harder, though he danced so unruly. The jungle would shake and his mom and dad frown. He would twirl around and around, then wound up so tight he would finally fall down. Ozzie would leap high on one foot and stand up on his toes. Off balance he'd teeter and land on his nose. By the end of a week, the jungle was wrecked, and those who loved Ozzie feared he'd soon break his neck. He had to be stopped, be made to face facts. Dancing takes skills that an elephant lacks. But who was to tell him he was too big for dancing, without any grace for leaping and prancing? The jungle elders met to get the job done. It should be Ozzie's father, they decided, to talk to his son. But what would he say to Ozzie? His father didn't know, until watching Ozzie practice, a plan began to grow. He'd throw a party for Ozzie. He'd give his kid a chance. With a little luck, he'd find someone to teach the boy to dance. And find someone Ozzie's dad most certainly did. A young lady named Roselle. She was all things lovely and graceful. She was perfect, a gazelle. Roselle was known as a tireless teacher, patient and instructive. She'd teach Ozzie one major thing: ballet was not destructive. The night of the party came at last. The guests were eager to see if a ballet dancing elephant had finally been born, and if Ozzie, in fact, was he. Roselle just smiled when they asked her if it truly and really was true. She gave Ozzie a wink as they walked onto the stage. His feet will do what his heart tells them to. There were few times, it must be admitted, when Ozzie got carried away. But Roselle would take him firmly to task, and this is what she would say: "There are many to teach and things to be taught, but the battle is lost if the war's never fought. Prove to them they were wrong. Don't give their doubts power at all. The only way anyone learns to dance is when they're willing to fall." Roselle and Ozzie twirled about and leaped into the air. They were a magnificent sight to behold, this beautifully graceful ballet dancing pair.
And we can pull up the chair, or if you want to stand, it doesn't matter either way.
I understand.
Okay.
My name is Donna, and now I'm going to ask you to go from being 3 or 4 to being menopausal.
That one's easy.
You're asking me to do that?
And it's all, you know, it takes its different forms.
Okay.
This is called Subject to Change, and it's an essay from the collection I'm working on. I'm coming of age again. This is the second time around for me. The first time it was called puberty. This time it's called menopause. Going through puberty meant, amongst other things, learning to live my life with estrogen, which is no small feat. In fact, it took me almost 35 years to get the knack of it. And then, just when I had estrogen all figured out, boom, menopause. Which means, amongst other things, learning to live my life without estrogen. My only comfort this time is that it won't take me 35 years to do it. It can't. First of all, in 35 years, I'll be 86. If I'm still here by then, I'm sure I'll have other things on my mind, like 87, for instance. And if I'm not still here, well, all the more reason to have other things on my mind. A lot happened to me between puberty and menopause. During puberty, I got my period, I got breasts, and I got Richie Palazzo. Well, once I got breasts, getting Richie was easy. He came with the territory, if you know what I mean. Still, I was quite happy about it. I had been eyeing Richie since we were in 4th grade, but he had no interest in me back then. But in 7th grade, things changed. In 7th grade, I started wearing a bra, and suddenly, Richie was all mine. Of course, he still had no interest in me, but I didn't know that. I had no idea that the only reason Richie tolerated me was because I was inextricably attached to my chest. But then, so was he. So we were even, sort of. As different as puberty and menopause are, there are similarities. Hair, for example. During puberty, suddenly there was hair where there had never been hair before. And the same thing happened to me during menopause. Granted, the hair I sprouted during puberty and the hair I sprouted during menopause was in different places, but the shock value was the same. And given the choices between hairs, as it were, I choose puberty hair any day. It's much easier to deal with. Simply getting dressed takes care of the matter. This, however, cannot be said when it comes to concealing a full beard and mustache. Sleeping also took on new meaning after menopause. Back in the day, sleep was a noun and a verb. Now it's solely a noun. When I was a teenager, I used to daydream about being a famous movie star or a prima ballerina, or at the very least, double-jointed. Now all I daydream about is sleeping. According to the dictionary, sleep is a state in which eyes are closed, muscles and nerves are relaxed, and consciousness is suspended. Clearly, whoever wrote that definition was not menopausal. The menopausal definition of sleep is much shorter. One word: insomnia. My eyes are not closed, my muscles are everything but relaxed, and my consciousness is anything but suspended. I'm in a state called awake. I toss and turn and look at the clock and fluff my pillow and read and don't read and listen to the radio and don't listen to the radio and take a hot bath and watch TV and don't watch TV, and finally, it's morning. It's time to get up, but not for me. I'm too tired to get up. All night long, I'm up trying to get down. Now it's morning, and I'm down trying to get up. Don't kid yourself. Menopause takes no prisoners. Sometimes I actually do fall asleep, but it's short-lived and sweaty. Sweaty as in night sweats. That's what they're called at night. During the day, they're called hot flashes. In either case, I feel like I'm on fire from the inside out, and all I want to do is take off all my clothes and run into the nearest meat locker, which is something Richie and I considered doing during puberty, but for very different reasons. Hot used to mean kissing Richie and not coming up for air. Now, hot means telling Richie to buzz off and fighting the dog for the car window. Air, that's all I want now. I'm talking hardcore, big-time air. I'm talking tie me to the wing of an airplane air. I'm talking menopause. Estrogen, or the lack thereof, changes everything. Now that I'm a quart low, so to speak, I realize that much of who I thought I wasn't. It's clear to me now that core beliefs and philosophies that I was sure were me weren't and aren't. My priorities have been radically revamped. For instance, I spent years thinking I really cared what Richie thought of my thighs. I even thought I cared what I thought about my thighs. The fact is, I don't give a damn what anyone, including me, thinks about my thighs or my anything else for that matter. These days, any and all anatomical scrutiny conducted by me, on me, consists of the following criteria. First is the body part in question where it should be or thereabouts. And second is said body part still functioning to one degree or another. Affirmative answers to these questions and I'm good to go. In my youth, I learned what it means to go round in circles. If I wasn't busy chasing my own tail, I was busy chasing someone else's. Kids, husbands, family, even a boss or two. I ran my heart out for all of them, sometimes willingly. Now I'm learning a different lesson. Menopause is teaching me what it means to come full circle. And given the choices between circles, as it were, coming full is much better than going round. It's a relief knowing that from this point forward, whatever I do with tails, my own or anyone else's, chasing isn't an option, which is fine with me. I've got better things to do anyway, like shave.
I just brought two short things. The first one is called Winter 1982. Once she tugged a dogwood branch and snow magic drifted down. We began dancing. I believed Winter, a girl could trap happy time on the tip of her tongue. Good memories there were some, but often crying sweltered our nights, feverish fretting, the clenching, unclenching of hands. I dismembered the raisin mouth you sank smiling in morning porridge. I trailed the groove yielded from your pace. Two incense owls perched sentry on a parlor shelf, stared through smoke amazed as I gathered threads from your monogrammed apron and wove myself a soul. Beneath the blue aegis of a terry cloth robe, perhaps you still suffered girlhood dreams. Winter dawns deemed you cold-blooded, shallow, yet I collaged these myths, scenes dull as pearls or vulnerably green. I bartered lost buttons, swept lime from basement walls, costume dolls for spring, and March umbrellas slow, a molted month. Sleep drunk and swain, it would be days before I raped the neighbor's garden and carried jonquils to our red oak door, this daughter's offering. And this is called Melt. Raw pulp, this is pale etching of flesh, a body bent into itself. The translucent eye, the blending of shade with sea and sky, what can gather origin here? Spots of scrape and abrasion, skinny taste of tin on the tongue, adding bit with crumbling bit, this is synergism and effect, a sum production greater than my means to an end. A disease and melt is a thinning film across the mouth, that secret again ousted, a bitter expulsion from the quick and the dead, forgotten friend you are divided land, cracking at your perimeters. Winding gyres, spinning stairs, in spirals we measure the patchy path of progression. Our steps beget admission, unraveling thoughts as if air molecules chiming against the eardrum quiver and shape into sound. I hear a voice and recognize, I speak a verse and understand how an outer crust of calcium can begin from the grit and sand of habit. Organic. Mend of soul with light and wind, a folding form finds comfort in the blind and urgent crawl towards land. A spirit in convalescence is tender at the base of its wings. The beating of waves against her shell births a rhythm by which she will one day sing, sweet melody thawing in the thick of the throat, echoes of a courage fleshy and real, for we walk with new purpose from the refuse, each ferrying scars our signs of survival.
This is the setting of this is the time period was in the late 1930s, early 1940s, and it's kind of it's a novel that it takes off from the fact that there were several landings on the United States coast, one in Florida, one in New Jersey, or on Long Island, of German saboteurs from U-boats, and all the ones that were landed were German Americans that had been brought up and spent a number of years in the United States before they went back to Germany. All 8 in the 2 groups were captured thanks to the help of one of the leaders of one of the groups who essentially gave up the the plot, and but there's never been a definitive statement that there were no more than those two. That most people speculate that there weren't any more saboteurs landed, and so I'm just kind of taking off from that little questionable area. Maybe somebody did land. This is kind of a prologue. One of the saboteurs that's preparing to land. I'm going home today, back to the land where my father died. We moved there after the war. When he came home, he was skinny and slumped and wobbly. His leg was crippled. Ragged scars were carved in the side of his face and arm. 2 fingers were missing on his left hand. He laughed when he told me about what happened. "Clumsy me," he said. "Tripped over my own helmet trying to get away." He spent 2 years in France, though it seemed longer to me as a young boy. Our boat ride to America was hard for him. We were packed into steerage along with hundreds of others. I remember the pained expressions and suppressed moans as the ship was tossed about in the waves of the North Atlantic. "It'll be a better life," he said. I think he was trying to convince himself more than he was me. He used the 2 weeks on the voyage to teach me some English. He told stories in English of America, like he did for so many others in classes he taught before the war. We got to Phelps a month after we left and moved in with Father's brother. He migrated to northern Wisconsin along with thousands of others before the war. In a relentless exchange of letters, he convinced Father, over Mother's objections, to leave the political confusion and economic uncertainty and join him and his family in America. Father healed slowly over the next year. He spent his time reading and writing. We walked every day, even in the deep snow. "It'll make you a good soldier," he said. After a year, he got a job teaching language arts at the high school. As soon as he learned he had a job, we moved into town into a small house near the lumber mill. My mother died 8 years later during the winter of my senior year in high school. That same year, one of my cousins drowned in Long Lake on a fishing trip. The other one went east to college and became a teacher. The economy collapsed a few years after I graduated, but it didn't seem to hurt the lumber business. The Norwegians, Swedes, Finns, and we were able to survive as a community. Everyone helped everyone else, at least for a few years. Then the trouble started. One night, December 14th to be exact, my uncle rode his horse through the snow into town to see Father. They sat together in the kitchen talking for half an hour before asking me to join them. I heard bits and pieces of their conversation as I sat reading next to the fireplace. Germany's recovery, the Bund, Adolf Hitler. "Danny Hirsch was fired today," my uncle said, "because he was German." Be careful. I knew what he was talking about. I felt it. At work, at the store, sour looks and short answers. It was like we were carrying some sort of contagious disease. Father stared at me and smiled. "It'll pass, but you'll need a thick skin for a while." It didn't pass. In the late afternoon of the next day, a group of 5 or 6 men with their faces covered entered my father's classroom and dragged him out to a waiting truck. They drove to some woods beyond the cemetery on the east end of town where they stripped him naked, slopped heated tar over him, and emptied bags of chicken feathers over his battle-scarred body. They left him there in the snow. Several hours later, near dusk, a Finn found Father alongside the road just a few hundred yards from where the thugs had left him. He was dead. Over the next month, my aunt died from influenza, and my uncle decided to move south so he could be closer to his son, who was teaching in North Carolina. I quit my job at the mill and went to Milwaukee. I wanted to know more about the German-American Bund. Several of my new friends and I drove to Chicago in February to attend a rally that had been organized by a man named Walter Cappy. "They'll pay your way back," he said. 3 of us left the next day. That was 2 years ago, before the war. In a few hours, I'll go ashore in America for a second time. I still miss my father.
I am Laura Lang, and I've been reworking a dummy for a children's book that I'm working on, a picture book called Shadow, A Kitten Comes Home. And this is a true story. I've never read this before, so forgive me if I stumble a little bit. Time to wake up. Shadow's green eyes opened halfway, and he gave a big stretch. He stretched his neck, he stretched his tail, he stretched his legs. He loved to nap almost as much as he loved to play with his brothers and sister. After spending the morning leaping and rolling, racing and chasing, prancing and dancing, Shadow and his brothers Streak and Scamp and his sister Softpaws always curled up together in a neat hump of black and white fur to sleep in the grass and bask in the sun. With a wide yawn, Shadow stretched up as tall as the yellow dandelions and turned around to see who else was awake. Where was everyone? There was no Streak lying on the ground behind him. There was no Scamp curled up with his head on his brother's stomach. There was no Softpaws snuggled up in a furry ball with her black and white face hidden between her paws. And there was no Mama anywhere to be seen. Mama, with her fluffy tortoiseshell coat and lightning-fast paws, was a good hider, blending into the underbrush effortlessly and disappearing from view. His sisters and brother, with their assortment of long and short, black and white patched fur, were always easier to find. This time, though, there was no sign of them anywhere. The ground was cold, except where Shadow had been sleeping. The only scents he could find were ferns and wildflowers, dirt and pine cones. No Mama, no Streak or Scamp or Softpaws. Shadow was all alone. Maybe they'd just gone hunting for dinner, Shadow thought, or for a sunnier spot to nap, or a new game to play. Surely they wouldn't go far, leaving him all alone. Mama wouldn't do that, not to her #1 kitten. She was very protective of all her babies, guarding them from harm and teaching them wonderful things. She taught her kittens how to hide from dogs and raccoons and humans. She'd shown them how to hunt for beetles and mice and lizards. And she taught them that the big shiny pan full of wonderfully smelly food at the edge of the woods was good to eat, but only after the human who'd filled it went away. When Mama knew that she was going to have a new litter of kittens, she searched for a good place to give birth to her babies. The little house at the edge of the woods seemed like the best place, despite the black dog and the brown dog and the human who lived inside. And while there were scents of many strange cats, they never came outside, living as they did in the big picture window that looked out into the trees. Mama found an opening beneath the wooden porch and moved right in. When the human saw the long-haired feral cat with a swollen belly slipping into the hole, she began leaving the big shiny pan full of wonderfully smelly food for the pregnant cat every day. So Mama decided to stay for a while, digging a snug hole in the dirt beneath the porch where she gave birth to her 4 tiny black and white kittens. The kittens grew quickly, their eyes opened wide, and their hair grew long and silky. Mama fed them with her warm, delicious milk until they were big enough to start chewing up food with their sharp little teeth. The kittens played and napped, ate and played, snuggled and cuddled, and chased each other beneath the little house on the edge of the woods. And when they were hungry, they cried and cried until Mama led them out to a big shiny pan full of wonderfully smelly food, and they filled their little bellies until the skin was stretched as tight as a drum. They cried so loud sometimes that the human could hear them through the floorboards of the little house on the edge of the woods, and worried about what their lives would be like. But Mama and her kittens didn't know anything about that. They lived happily in their warm burrow and ate all kinds of wonderfully smelly food from the big shiny pan, and played and chased and snuggled close to each other for warmth and comfort. But then one night a strange metal thing appeared beside the wooden porch. Inside was, oh, so delicious a smell. Something good, good, good to eat. But Mama wouldn't let her kittens go inside, not until she'd checked it out first. Stepping lightly, carefully, oh, so slowly, Mama went inside to investigate. Crash! Bang! Mama howled with fury as the metal trap slammed shut behind her. Shadow, Streak, Scamp, and Softpaws raced back under the little house, terrified by Mama's thrashing and by the heavy thump-thump of the human running towards them. Only Shadow had been brave enough to peek out from beneath the porch to see a big fluttering cloth cover Mama where she was trapped in the metal box, and to see the human carry his Mama away. The 4 frightened kittens huddled together under the little house, too afraid to go looking for Mama or even to eat from the big shiny pan of wonderfully smelly food. The scary human came poking beneath the porch, crying, "Here, kit, kit, kit," and crying, "Meow." But the kittens weren't fooled. Their mama had taught them to stay away from humans, no matter how kind they seemed, and they hid behind the cinder blocks beneath the little house while the humans shone a bright flashlight around looking for them. Luckily, Mama reappeared the next evening as the sun was dropping behind the trees. The human brought a big plastic box with a handle on top right up to the hole beneath the porch and unlatched the metal gate. Mama came rushing out and ran under the porch to where her hungry kittens were waiting. Poor Mama. She was all wobbly on her feet and the hair was gone from her tummy. She felt lightheaded and kind of sore too, but she was so happy to find her kittens safe that she hardly noticed. Shadow, Streak, Scamp, and Softpaws gathered close around their mama, pushing and crying for her attention. She licked each furry little head in turn and reassured them that they were safe, but she didn't feel all that safe herself now. And if she didn't feel safe, how could she keep her babies safe? Everything went back to normal for a while. Mama and her baby slept curled up in the nest she dug out of the dirt beneath the porch. They played and raced and snuggled together, caught beetles and lizards, and ate the wonderfully smelly food in the big shiny pan. And the 4 little kittens got bigger and stronger and braver, especially Shadow. He was the bravest of them all. But one day when Mama took her kittens into the woods to hunt and play, she didn't go back to the hole beneath the porch. With Shadow and Streak, Scamp and Softpaws leaping and sneaking, bouncing and chasing behind her, she went deeper into the woods than ever before. It had been 2 weeks since Mama took her kittens away from the place where they'd been born. But now Mama and Streak and Scamp and Softpaws were gone. Shadow was all alone. He spent a long, scary night huddled deep in a pile of dry, crackling leaves. When the first rays of the sun fell on top of the tall pine trees, he pulled himself up, gave himself a shake from head to tail, and took his first steps out into the world all by himself. First, he tried to find a scent trail, hoping it would lead him to his missing family. He took a deep breath and several short, quick ones, sorting out the many smells his sensitive nose detected. There was a smell of fish bones from the trout Mama had caught in the stream yesterday. There was a sense of wildflowers and pine cones and moss and dead leaves, all of which smelled nice, but did him no good at all. There were bird and raccoon and possum smells, but no cat scent could he find. Maybe Mama went back to the little house on the edge of the woods, Shadow thought. But where was the edge of the woods? Shadow sat down beneath a clump of ferns and thought very hard. Mostly he and his brothers and sister had run and jumped and bounced and played as Mama led them through the woods. They hadn't paid much attention to which direction they were going. Now he tried to remember anything at all that might help him find his way back. At last, the sound of gurgling water in the stream nearby made him sit up straight, nose twitching in the air. And that's as far as I've gotten.
Yeah, my name is Bill Robertson. I think most of you have seen me around if you don't know me, and I know most of you, I think. Pleasure to be with you today and finally have the opportunity to read. I've written a complete manuscript, which is my view of stroke recovery, or I should say recovery from a massive stroke. One of the things I've done in this manuscript, hopefully to become a book one day, or as my son says, I don't give a damn if, Dad, it's already a book. But anyway, one of the things I've done in this book is to demonstrate how I've gotten through a lot of depression and hard times, and by going back to happier times in my life, visitations with better days, or revisitations. I wrote a number of chapters, I guess you could call them flashbacks or recollections, and I'd like to read one of them to you here. It's called Scotty, the Dame, and I. My grandfather Scotty, well into his 90s, loved to stop by the travel agency once a week and update me on his most recent ingenious method of repairing tattered or torn clothing. One day he proudly showed me and the entire staff how he had fixed a hole in his shirt with Scotch tape and stapled a loose cuff back in place on his pants. If this wasn't proof of his frugality, I don't know what would be, because he certainly could afford to purchase new clothing when needed. Scotty also loved mail order gadgets. He chose to demonstrate to us his latest toy, an adjustable golf club he could set for any loft, from a driver to a sand wedge, by simply taking a coin and turning a screw on the shaft. Clients were arriving to pick up tickets or make travel arrangements. I watched in utter disbelief while Scotty put a golf ball down on the carpet and said, "Watch this, Bill, it's a 2-iron now." Scotty had played golf since he was a lad and had been a notably accomplished player until age caught up with him in his mid-50s. But I doubted he would get the ball airborne with that goofy club, endangering our good customers. Unfortunately, I reacted too slowly to put a stop to this madness, and he took a mighty whack at the ball. Man, was it ever smoked. It hit the leg of one of our best, one of my personal favorite clients, Dame Catherine Carpenter. Although it must have hurt like hell and been quite embarrassing, she showed her ever-present class by making a funny remark of some kind and quickly accepting Scotty's and my profuse apologies. I told Scotty he would always be welcome in the office. Let's see if I can catch up here. For visits. But if he ever brought another golf club, I would have to impound it, and he might never see it again. I shall never forget the late Dame Catherine Carpenter. First time we ever met was when a Rolls-Royce convertible parked in front of our office, and a very attractive woman wearing a wide-brimmed hat and scarf jumped out of the driver's seat and strode through our front door. Let me put this event in perspective by saying that Rolls-Royces are about as common in Wilmington as polar bears. It is no stretch to state that the mouth of every single person in the office, including mine, was agape. One of our travel agents got up her nerve and asked to help the lady. The answer was, "If that's Mr. Robertson standing there looking for something to do, I would like to speak with him." A bit unnerved, I came over, shook hands, and learned her name. She was quite insistent that it was Carpenter rather than Carpenter. We soon dispensed with all that, and I escorted her to my office, commenting about what a beautiful car she was driving. She said, "Thanks, but every time the damn thing needs a little work, I have to drive it 5 hours to Greensboro, and I'm about to decide it ain't worth it." Once situated in my office, she wasted little time telling me I had been highly recommended as the best person in town to handle her sometimes unique and complicated travel arrangements to places like India and Africa. I told her I would be honored, and I asked her to please call me Bill. She asked me to stop calling her Dame Carpenter and use Kay or Catherine as I preferred. "Well, Dame Catherine, please let me gather some basic travel profile information to have on file for your trips." She quickly interrupted. "Here's the long and the short of it. I have Scotty show dogs, and I sometimes take a couple of them along on my trips. Therefore, I never travel in first or business class, so I can sit by a window in the right rear of the aircraft, which is usually over the cargo and baggage handling area, and allows me to see that my dogs are being put aboard. If I don't see them, I raise hell until I get some action. It was hard for me to imagine that she would not also be concerned about the rest of her baggage being loaded, but perhaps she was. In any event, I knew I would have to take great care of booking her trips to be certain plans were in place for the dogs to travel along if she wanted them. I asked if she had any trips she would like for me to work on. Just an easy one, she said. I go to Bermuda several times a year and take 2 of my dogs on a rotating basis. She gave me the dates of her next trip and said to book them at the Ariel Sands, a small hotel where she dearly loved to stay because they liked her dogs and treated them like royalty. I was relieved that the first booking was so simple it would be difficult to screw up, and I would not need to research which of the good small hotels in Bermuda allowed dogs. Kay challenged me with her next trip, an odyssey around India, but I got it done to her satisfaction, and when she came by the office after returning to thank me for a job well done, she was eager to tell a funny joke she heard from a fellow passenger on one of her Air India flights. It was about a lady driving across Canada who was flagged down for speeding by a Royal Canadian mounted policeman. Attempting to deflect his attention from the issue at hand, she said, "Yes, yes, what is it, officer? I suppose you are selling tickets to one of your silly policeman's balls." With that, the policeman's great horse reared up beside her car. The policeman said, "Madam, I'll have you know that Royal Canadian mounted policemen have no balls." Although I had an occasional joke or two, there was never one good enough to repay her in kind. Not too long after Catherine's trip to India, Mother Teresa was invited to Wilmington to be one of the recipients of the Dr. Albert Schweitzer Humanitarian Awards, which were given annually at UNCW, University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Happily, Mother Teresa accepted and came over to Wilmington for the ceremony. I've always felt Dame Catherine Carpenter had a lot to do with Mother Teresa's acceptance of the invitation. I'm not Orson Welles, obviously. Let's see here. Especially since we stayed at Kay's house while she was here. Several times I've had a good laugh as I imagined Kay telling Mother Teresa the Royal Canadian Mounted Police joke, and Mother Teresa slapping her knee and saying, "Well, have you heard the one about the traveling salesman and the farmer's daughter?" Years later, Kay called to tell me she had to cancel a planned trip because she was in the hospital with rectal cancer. When I expressed my concern, she said, "Well, you know, Bill, if it tain't one end, it's t'other." She lived for many years after, but died from something else several years after my stroke.
This is a book that I had written. I'm going to read a little scene from it. It's called Port Royal, the Wickedest City on Earth. And it's about Port Royal, Jamaica. And I'll tell you a little something about Port Royal. Jamaica was under British control. And pirates were allowed to operate out of Port Royal because they would raid the Spanish Main, and England was at war with Spain at the time. So anyway, this is about one of the characters in Port Royal right before the earthquake, and he's a warlock. So we'll start reading here.
And I'll get the newsletter. So when you do events, come on in. Which day are your events usually?
It varies.
Matthew picked up the wooden oaken mallet, a wooden 14-inch handled knife, a worsted pouch, and went to the back room. Shutters barred the windows, and he crossed the room to open them. He shuffled along the best he could, putting his good leg in front and then drawing his shrunken one forward alongside. Walking this way was difficult, but he had learned to adapt rather well since his injury. He knew his limitations and accepted them without complaint. Some said Matthew was lucky to walk at all. Sometimes at night, especially when he had too much to drink, he would have dreams about what happened before. At 14, Matthew was very large for his age. Most people took him for 4 or 5 years older. He was a deckhand on the merchant vessel Wolf, a brigantine under British registry. The master was Jonathan Thomas, a tough bantam-sized man, a few inches over 5 feet, with unruly red hair and that flowed into a thick red beard. Captain Thomas was a seaman of the old school, harsh and tough and with a temper to match. He tolerated no insubordination, idleness, or thievery among his crew. Woe was to the man who violated his rules. One of Matthew's shipmates, an Irishman by the name of McDowell, had a pocket watch he admired. It was the most beautiful thing Matthew had ever seen. Golden yellow with an elegant 3-masted sailing ship on the front cover. Not like the clumsy merchantman he was on, but a well-fitted out, handsome craft, the likes of which made him daydream of being a romantic seaman and traveling to far-off exotic lands. When McDowell held it in his fingers and rocked it to and fro, it would cease to be an engraving. Matthew could really see it sail, its canvas full to bursting and running before the wind. McDowell would watch Matthew, then grin crookedly with that way he had and say, "It caught a wee bit of magic when it was made, laddie. If and you truly believe, it'll take your soul and sail forever." Matthew was excited, captivated. He knew he must have the watch. He needed it. One night when they were approaching the West Indies from the south and McDowell was sleeping off the effects of too much rum, Matthew sneaked below and crept to the man's hammock. He found the seaman as he expected, snoring and dead to the world. Matthew knew he kept the watch in the left front pocket of his breeches. With stealth, he slipped his fingers in and gently probed for the case, but McDowell awoke and saw him. At first, the Irishman looked confused, like he might be having a dream. Then he grabbed Matthew's hand and started yelling. Matthew carried a billy in his waistband and beat McDowell repeatedly about the head and shoulders. McDowell's nose blossomed like a red, gurgling rose. His mouth turned to soft crimson mush, and his hands fell away. Matthew clutched the watch and bolted up the stairs. Freedom, starlight, and fresh breezes waited above. As he was about to clear the last 2 steps, something grabbed his foot. He looked down and saw a horrible apparition that resembled McDowell. The hideous smear of his mouth was vermilion and dripping. It hung loosely open with no teeth. His eyes were staring, and his nose was an open wound. Matthew tried to jerk his foot away, but the gore-spattered man possessed the strength of a demon. Matthew's mouth was flapping grotesquely, his mouth a fat, livid worm. He reached out for Matthew, climbing the steps 2 at a time. Matthew planted his foot firmly at the top step and kicked wildly with the free one. He bashed the slippery red face before his left eye and then caught the side of the head with his throat and his throat. The effect was devastating. The square-toed boot struck the soft flesh. Matthew heard a sickening snap. McDowell gazed with disbelief and then turned to instant dead weight and fell to the floor with a broken neck. Matthew swung around and saw Captain Thomas glaring at him through dark, malevolent eyes. If he hated thieves, he hated murderers even less. The captain drew a pistol from his jacket. He was always armed to enforce his law, and started across the deck. His lips were working, but only a distant muffled sound could be heard. Matthew spun around, snatched up a wooden hatch cover, and ran to the railing. He flung the cover into the black water and dove after it. The captain's pistol exploded and shattered Matthew's leg as he left the ship. Matthew was incapable of swimming for more than a few minutes and would surely drown. He remembered what McDowell had said about the watch. "It caught a wee bit of magic when it was made, laddie. If and you truly believe, it'll take your soul and sail forever." Matthew clutched the watch and wished with all of his might he might to be saved. He He wished so hard that the blood rushing to his temples made him lightheaded, and he nearly blacked out. That is when he bumped into the hatch cover and pulled himself aboard. Finding it had been a miracle. Matthew gazed at the golden watch in his hand and wondered if it really could have saved him. After many hours, Matthew was washed ashore at the southwest corner of Lucia. He was discovered and taken in by a strange little man by the name of George Lightfoot. George was a very handsome man, half Indian with dark eyes and a proud nose. His hair was straight and black as a dense thicket of spruce at midnight, and his angular features were softened by velvety brown skin. Because he delved in magic for no personal gain, George was considered a white witch. He merely liked to help others less fortunate. If you were a fisherman, you went to George and asked his blessing before you would cast a net. If you were a farmer, you went to him before planting a seed. The hunter, the baker, the shipbuilder, they all did the same. They would walk from the surrounding villages and take him a gift, some food perhaps, and ask if God smiled upon them. Usually George would answer favorably, and they would beam and nod their heads. He would bless them anyway, even if they didn't need his help, because it was mostly reassurance they sought. Other times, when he saw dark clouds on the horizon, he would do much more. Those people were the ones who needed his help the most. He would chant from inside a magic circle drawn in the dirt and scatter personal possessions of the people he wished to help, bits of the person's hair or fingernails, along with a mysterious white powder he kept in a small leather pouch. And he never failed to have a bountiful year. When Matthew was healthy again and saw this, he was puzzled. He asked the old man why he did not use the power for himself. Because it is a gift, George had answered. If you use this force only for yourself, it will soon turn against you. There is no magic in the world that can ease your suffering. Suffering? What suffering? The only suffering I see is caused by this run-down shack we're living in and the tattered rags on our backs. The old man gazed at him for a moment and shook his head in disgust. It's not good to speak of such things, to even think them. There's no need of it. You have such power. Just think of the riches you could have. You wouldn't have to live in this dirty, run-down shack, practically begging for your supper. Kings would come to you, their hats in their hands. They would bow and offer you anything in their kingdoms. Gold, jewels, the prettiest wenches, their daughters even. George spun around, his dark eyes venomous. For a fearful moment, Matthew thought he might strike him. Don't say such things. You don't know what it can do. The power can turn black and sour. George was right, of course. The youth did not understand. Matthew saw the anger in the old man's face and wisely said no more. Before the year was out, Matthew had become apprenticed to George and did most of the menial chores, which were numerous. Sometimes Matthew thought George dreamed up new tasks for him to do just to keep him out of trouble. However, the long hours of toil would pay their dividends when George would show him a new trick or a bit of magic. Oh, there was some trickery to be sure, but the meat of the show, the very heart, was pure magic. Matthew was delighted. He was learning a skill, a craft to be respected, even feared. Sometimes he thought, I, not George, will be the lord of the manor. I will reap the benefits and do as I please, without the weakling George to interfere. Meanwhile, he would do as he was told and learn as much as he could. It happened by accident at first, quite innocently in fact. A fisherman by the name of Nesbitt had come with his son to receive George's blessing for a good catch. As usual, George had taken a lock of hair from each of their heads, spread it around in a magic circle, and did his curious chanting dance. Matthew waited until everyone had left, picked up the scattered hair, and conjured up some magic of his own, black magic. He believed his pocket watch had possessed magic power, so he placed it in the center of the circle to help focus his psychic energy. Matthew did not really expect the curse to work. It was almost certain not to, but work it did, with frightening vengeance. Nesbitt had gone out in his sloop, the Marianne, with his son and another man. They did not catch a single fish all day, but Nesbitt's only son had fallen overboard and was eaten by a large shark that had been shadowing the boat all day. His friend restrained the distraught man from throwing himself in the water to save his son. The next time Matthew tried his powers was less than a week later. 6 people had come to see George, a glowing bride-to-be, the happy groom, and their smiling parents. They wanted to wish the couple well so they could have a long and happy marriage with many healthy children. George took a ceremonial clipping from everyone and went into his special special marriage circle. He had the bride and groom step in too. They held hands while he spread their hair around and chanted in some strange tongue. When he was through, the delirious couple went to him. Their elated parents pumped George's hand profusely and went home to prepare for a magnificent wedding. Matthew crept from hiding, gathered the hair from the ground, and made his own magic circle. With the aid of the watch, he conjured up the most evil, foul curse to ever be put upon a young couple. Matthew was not doing this to be malicious. He just wanted to prove to himself that the first time was no accident, that he really possessed the power. They were married 2 days later. Inside of a week, the bride had fallen sick with an unknown illness and died. Grief-stricken, the groom had committed suicide by hanging himself from the rafters of their new honeymoon house. That's it. Thank you.
My name is Violet Lyle, and I have written a book, and it's called 49 Days to Pentecost. In this book, we confront one of the most notorious of villains. This book is about a young lady who is a God-fearing young lady, has been from her childhood, and she is on a debate team. She's a junior in college, and she's on a debate team. And she is debating reincarnation. Now, Carrie Webster has debated, she considers herself the greatest debater and researcher in the whole school. And she has researched reincarnation. And she does not believe in reincarnation, and so she presented the con side of reincarnation and is exuberant because she got a standing ovation, and it's going around in her head as far as this standing ovation, and she's just caught up with herself when she finally realizes, well, now, Carrie Webster, what are you going to do? You've put yourself in a box, and now you've got to prove there is reincarnation. What are you going to do? Reincarnate yourself? She's going out of the auditorium after presenting the debate, and she misses the top step, falls, and she hits her head, and when she wakes up, she is in Judea, Galilee of Judea. She is Judas Iscariot, 3 days before he is to hand over Jesus to the authorities. This is one of the greatest debates there is, and whether Judas was actually a part of God's plan, or was he really the devil incarnate, just sent to heckle. And in my book, I present Carrie presents what she believes to be God's own wisdom about Judas. What I'd like to read to you is you will be Judas at this point. Open your mind. We don't know about Judas, but we are in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I would like to read from that part of the book. Thomas was sitting next to me, and he asked me, what did Jesus say? I was repeating the comments made by Jesus in Peter's response when I heard Jesus say, "Hand me over to the authorities." They were asking, who will do that? Jesus replied, "It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread." With that, Jesus dipped the piece of bread, leaned toward me, and gave me the piece of bread. I took the piece of bread and ate it. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Brother, it's time. Go quickly and take care of what you are to do." He hadn't forgotten. I jumped up. "Yes, Rabbi, I will take care of it right away." Jesus had already announced that after the meal, we would all go to the Garden of Gethsemane. I went quickly to the high priest to tell him that Jesus would be waiting to talk to him now in the Garden of Gethsemane, across the Kidron Valley. The high priest looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing here, Judas?" I answered, "The rabbi will see you now. Follow me and I will lead you there." He replied, "What kind of trickery are you planning? What do you mean? You come to me at this hour at the beginning of the holy day and want me to follow you so that I can talk to a rabbi? I can talk to rabbis all day. It's Jesus of Nazareth that I want to speak to. Jesus of Nazareth is my teacher, and it is he that is willing to speak to you in the Garden of Gethsemane. There is no way I'm going to follow you across the Kidron Valley, where crowds of Jesus' followers could come at me and kill me." I assured him, no, only 12 of his disciples are to be there with him. He was not convinced. And he said, "I will send some of my slaves ahead of me and a few soldiers to guard them. I will follow some distance behind them, and if there is no trouble, I will meet with this Jesus of Nazareth in the Garden of Gethsemane across the Kidron Valley. I'm familiar with the garden." He snapped his fingers, and one of the priests came over and he whispered something to him. "Wait here," and they disappeared. Actually, I couldn't blame him for distrusting Jesus. Jesus said all kinds of things against not only him, but priests in general, the scribes and the Pharisees. What would I think if I were Caiaphas? He was back. He said, "Go outside the temple, and there you'll find my slaves waiting for you. Start out with them, but mind you, if anything happens to them, I will find you and have you publicly killed. Nothing will happen to them. I haven't set a trap for you." I stepped out into the darkness. I was greeted by some priests, some of his slaves, and a few soldiers. Maybe I should have been concerned for Jesus' safety, but his words filled my mind. We're in this together. I felt comforted. So the band of us set out for the garden. They carried lanterns and torches so that we could find our way in the dark. The few soldiers also had swords. As we walked, I kept looking back to see if Caiaphas was following. I saw no torches. I reasoned in my mind that of course he wouldn't follow too closely. If I could see him, anyone that might be hiding might be able to see him too. One of the high priest's slaves named Malchus asked, "Why do you keep looking behind? Is there someone out there who's planning on ambushing us?" I answered, "No, I'm looking to see if Caiaphas is behind us." He answered, "He knows the way." The garden was just ahead. It was so dark out. I wish that Jesus had lit a torch so I would know exactly where he is. My eyes strained in the dark. However, he should be able to see us coming from a distance with all the torches we had with us. They lit up our path like it was day. As we got closer, I saw a familiar group of rocks and a path. We were in the garden, but where was Jesus? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a voice came. "Who are you looking for?" We had all been concentrating so hard on finding our way that Jesus' voice scared us. He was right in front of them, and their torches picked up him and all the disciples standing around. They must have thought it was an ambush because they all jumped back and fell over each other and some low bushes and knocked each other down. Jesus asked them again, "Who are you looking for?" They got up quickly. They said, "We are looking for Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said, "I am he." I then stepped forward to explain to Jesus that Caiaphas was following behind because he feared a trap, but Jesus said, "Friend, do what you are here for." I remembered that I had been paid to lead them to Jesus and introduce them. I then said, "This is Jesus, the Christ, the one your master has had me bring you to." The group didn't move. Realizing that I had introduced him as the Christ and they were looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, I stated very clearly, "This is Jesus of Nazareth, the one whom you are seeking." They still did not move. Jesus spoke quietly to me and he said, "Friend, you identify me with a kiss." I was shocked. I remembered that the prophecy stated the betrayer would identify the Son of Man with a kiss. Shame filled my soul. I covered my face with my hands and I thought, "No, God, don't let it be me. I don't want to do this." Jesus again spoke to me. "This is to fulfill the scriptures." I removed my hands from my face. I glanced at Jesus with a pleading look. His look was one that told me he was determined to see this through, and I should be too. I tried to move my feet, but my feet felt like lead. With great effort, I stepped closer to Jesus. He must have sensed my problem because he moved one step closer to me. I embraced him and kissed him on his cheek. The slaves of the high priest grabbed Jesus and the other disciples. Jesus said, "I told you that I am he. Jesus has verified my statement to you that I am the one you are looking for. So therefore let these men go." When I realized that I had been tricked into delivering Jesus into their hands, and that their intention were to seize him, harm him, I was filled with anger and rage. "Caiaphas, you lying scoundrel, I might not know a day's wage, but I do know the price for killing a man's slave is 30 pieces of silver. So here's your money back." I grabbed a sword from one of the soldiers' sheaths, lifted it over my head, and aimed it for the center of Malchus' head, and lowered it, but he moved slightly, and I only cut off his ear. Jesus grabbed my hand and said, "No more of this." It had all happened so quickly that the other slaves were still holding on to the disciples. The disciples broke free and started fighting their captors. But when he caught my hand, he also looked at them and repeated, "No more." We all stopped. Jesus wouldn't even allow me the satisfaction of getting even with Caiaphas. A fair trade, 30 pieces of silver for the life of his slave. Jesus touched Malchus' ear, and it was immediately healed. Malchus seemed to have a newfound respect for Jesus, and he told the soldiers to bind Jesus' hands, but he granted Jesus' request to let the others go. Sorrow so deep filled my soul. The soldier stretched his hand toward me for his sword. I didn't realize I was still holding it. I dropped the sword and stepped out of the light of the torches. The 12 disciples had done the same. What had I just done? I leaned against a tree. I covered my face with my hands and dropped to my knees. What have I done? Groaning came from deep down inside me. I felt sick. I threw up. I got up off my knees and staggered to another tree and leaned against it. I felt a hand touch my shoulder. I opened my eyes. It was Peter. "Jude, are you all right?" I couldn't talk. Peter said, "Walk with me." I tried, but my legs were too weak. "Jude, Jesus said you were going to hand him over." A blank look came on my face, and I asked, "When?" "At this evening's meal. Didn't you hear him? He said that one of us would hand him over to the authorities, and when we asked who, he answered, 'The one that I have given the bread to eat.' He dipped the bread and gave it to you. Then he called you brother and told you to go to do what you are to do." I felt dizzy. I could hardly speak. "I didn't know," Peter added. "I'm going to follow to see where they take Jesus. Are you okay?" I stammered, "I don't know." He said, "I hate to leave you here. Hey, Jude, it can't be as bad as you think. Jesus knew this was going to happen and believed it to be God's will. You were only fulfilling the scriptures. We've seen him get out of tighter situations than this. Come with me." I told him I needed to be by myself and think. Peter told me, "I don't want them to get too far ahead of me." He disappeared quickly into the night. How could I have been so stupid, so naive? No, greedy. Maybe Peter is right. Maybe Jesus can get out of this. I yelled into the night, "Lord of heaven's army, deliver him from the hands of his enemies. And if you won't, take my life too. I won't be able to bear the guilt." I must know. I decided that I too would follow the soldiers and see where they take Jesus. All of a sudden my legs felt strong, light, almost like they had wings. I took a step and then I was running. I wasn't having any trouble finding my way in the dark. Suddenly I realized I'd caught up with them. I could hear the voices. I dropped back and followed at a distance. I followed them to the courtyard of Caiaphas. I dared not get too close. I decided to stay in the shadows. How was I going to find out what was happening? Just then I saw Peter going into the courtyard. I would wait and see if he or someone else came out, and I would ask them. I saw people going in that had been hecklers and naysayers in the crowds along the street and outside the temple gates. What were the chief priests planning? How were they getting all these people out so late and on the Passover? Surely the Sanhedrin wouldn't convene. Just then, I saw a man coming out of the courtyard. I found a long stick and pulled my robe over my head to hide my face. I didn't know this man, but he might recognize me. I walked as if I were lame. I bent over and lowered my head and walked to the man. "What's going on? It's after midnight," he said. "The man Jesus has been brought in for questioning." I asked, "Do you know if the Sanhedrin will be called in?" He replied, "Most of them are there already. The council is assembling." I thought, how are they getting in? The man saw me looking around and continued, "The gate's open. You could get closer. They must be entering through the temple door." I thanked him. He walked a short distance into the trees to relieve himself and then went back inside. I saw Peter standing with the guards and kept keeping warm by the fire. A shiver went through me. I was tempted to go nearer to get warm, but that thought left my mind as quickly as it came. I pulled my robe around me, and I sat down on the ground, pulling my legs and arms closer to me to hold my body heat in. I put my hands in my pockets. I had forgotten the bag of silver, dirty money now, tainted, the shiny silver that had glistened in the sun and had a melodious sound this morning was now tainted, dirty money. And if this meeting turned out as Jesus had predicted, a prediction that I refused to accept, it would become blood money. The silver that had given me a warm feeling now caused my blood to run cold. I felt cold and dirty. Money. Why did I have to love money? I didn't have any. I had lived on tips, free money all my life. Why hadn't I listened to Thomas? I had heard that the high priest was making plots to capture Jesus. I had even been present in groups where he had tried it. I had permitted Caiaphas to lure me into this plot. Satan entered my thoughts. No, Judas Iscariot. You walked into this yourself. You knew exactly what you were doing. Jesus' plans weren't going the way you wanted to go, so you thought you would steer them. Give them a little direction. If Jesus dies, you don't get to sit on the king's council. Face it, Judas. You agreed with the high priest and the scribe. Jesus isn't living by God's laws, by using God's name, but using God's name to break them. He even claims God Almighty to be his father. His father is Joseph, and you know it. He breaks the laws and flaunts it in front of anyone around him. Even his explanations don't make sense. He knows the laws and he makes exceptions for himself. You don't believe he's the Son of God. You never have. Your mother cooked up this plan that Jesus is your future. I said out loud, that's not true. But maybe it was. Maybe I did just pick Jesus as my leader because without him, Satan was back. He didn't call you like he did the others, did he, Judas? No, because you are the devil. Get over it, Judas. You're rotten to the core. You know the scriptures as well as Jesus. You break the laws too. You break a big one. Do you know this one, Judas? Thou shalt not steal. That's listed with the Big 10. Do you think people don't know you steal money from the common post? How many gifts have you bought Prissa over the years? You even steal from your parents. Do you think your mother's too busy to notice when you tear up receipts and keep the money? You're a scoundrel, Judas. You even steal from God's with the pittance you pass out to the poor beggars on the street. When the poor slobs thank God and give you a blessing, what do you say? You give them a pat on the shoulder and you say, you're welcome. They thank God and you say, you're welcome. You're really robbing God of his glory. We both know how he hates for any of us to usurp his wonderful praise and glory. I said out loud, Satan, leave me alone. My mind was quiet. My attention was immediately drawn to a man talking to Peter. He's shaking his head no. He left him and went to the guards and was pointing at Peter. The guards came over to him. They were discussing something. I strained to hear, but I was too far away. I can see Peter shaking his head back and forth in a no motion. Peter shaking his fists and shaking his head no. They better leave Peter alone. They know what's good for them. Peter can take care of himself. They're walking away. It's almost dawn. The cock crows once, twice. I see Peter looking around. He's stepping off by himself. He's covering his face and he's crying. Why? What did the guard say to him? The cock, the crowing. No, Peter, not you too. Just as Jesus had foretold that I would give him over to the authorities, he had told Peter that he would deny knowing him 3 times before the cock crowed twice. The hairs raised on my arms and neck. A chill ran through me. I looked at Peter and wondered if he was feeling the same thing. Peter were leaving. The man I had spoken to walked out with others. I called to him. What happened? He yelled back. They condemned him and are now recommending the death sentence. Death? I wondered what for. Oh God, what have I done? I glanced into the courtyard as Jesus was being led out. The guards were spitting on him. Some priests and others were screaming, prophesy. Some hit him. Jesus, I'm sorry. The words of Jesus flooded my mind. I must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed. The man continued, they're taking him to Pilate. I looked around for Peter. Maybe I could help him, like he had helped me in the garden, but I didn't see him. He must have slipped out with some of the other people. I was as cold as death. Satan was back. How are you ever going to live with yourself? What are people going to say about you? What you've done is unforgivable. I yelled out loud. Satan, get away from me. You've done enough damage for one day. My mind was quiet, but wait. Maybe I can fix things yet. It's late, but maybe not too late. Caiaphas is still in the temple. I'll confront him. I'll give him back the money. Satan said, why don't you do that, Judas? Go and give him back the 30 pieces of silver. That will make everything all right. I screeched, get out of here and leave me alone. I recognize you now and I don't want your advice. I went immediately through the open gate and through the open temple door. I could hear voices and I followed them. Caiaphas and his slave were standing and talking. Malchus was showing